So, we are going to discuss today cardiac cycle control, right? Or we can simply call it as cardiac control, right? So, it's cardiac control that we will talk about today. Control means that there are two types of control systems that work in our body. One is the chemical control and one is the nervous control. Now let's see that what kind of control works here to control the cardiac cycle, or you can say the events during one contraction and relaxation of the heart, or you can say during one heartbeat, right? So in our last class, we have talked about the cardiac cycle, and cardiac cycle basically is the sequence of event. Cardiac cycle is the sequence of events that take place during one heartbeat. That take place during one heartbeat, right? That once a heart contracts and relaxes, the sequence of events that take place during this, that is called as cardiac cycle, right? And in this cardiac cycle, as I told you, that we can divide it in two phases, or three phases, main three phases. One is called as generally two phases, that is systole and diastole, right? And when the cardiac contraction takes place, right? When the heart muscles contract and they just squeeze, or you can say they just allow the blood to come out of the heart, that is called as systole, or you can say the cardiac contraction that is taking place, right? So when the heart muscles contract and they push the blood outside the heart, outside the chamber, or you can say outside the heart, this is called as systole, right? Systole means contraction, right? And this systole is further divided into two phases. Number one, there is atrial systole. Atrial systole means when the atria are contracting. Atrial systole means when the atria contract, right? When they push the blood outside the atria and the blood enters into the, that blood always goes into the ventricles. I told you during the, when I was explaining you the circulation of the blood through the heart. So atrial contraction basically causes the atria to contract. And number two, it will allow the blood to enter into the, or you can say blood will be pushed into the ventricles, right? Ventricles are very next to them, as we all know. So that's why the atrial walls are thin, right? And they are not having much thick walls, so that it can create a little pressure to send the blood to the ventricles, which are very next to them. They don't have to create much pressure. इनको इतना ज़्यादा pressure create करने की ज़रूरत क्यों नहीं है? Because they don't have to push the blood to all the parts of the body. They just have to push the blood into the ventricles, and ventricles are very near to them. That's why very little pressure is required. Number two, during atrial systole, the atrioventricular valves open. Atrioventricular valves open. Why am I giving you the background of the cardiac cycle first? Because this cardiac cycle understanding is very important to know the cardiac control, right? So I'm revising a little bit from the end of the previous topic, that atrial systole is basically the atrial contraction, when the atria contract and the blood will be pushed into the ventricles. And during this, what will happen, that the atrioventricular valve named tricuspid and bicuspid, you all know that the atrioventricular valve that is present on the right side, or you can say between the right atrium and the right ventricle, that is called as tricuspid, because it has got three cups or three flaps of tissues. And the other one is called as bicuspid. Bicuspid mean that it has two flaps, right? So that's why it is called as bicuspid valve. So these two valves get open, right? They open. And which valve will close? The semilunar valve. And there are two types of semilunar valves present here. When the when the atrial systole will take place, the semilunar valves will close. Definitely, they have nothing to do with the atrial systole, because when the atria are contracting, they are pushing the blood. For example, let's suppose this is one atrium, right? And this is the other atrium, right? And when both the atria are squeezing and they're pushing the blood into the ventricles, right? When they're pushing the blood into the ventricles, obviously during the atrial systole, when the atria are contracting, they'll push the blood into the ventricles, right? And during that, the atrioventricular valve is open, and the semilunar valve that is present between the ventricle and the pulmonary artery and ventricle and the aorta, they will stay closed, right? Why they will stay closed? Because their ventricle contraction is not taking place, the blood is not yet reached to the semilunar valve. So during this atrial systole, semilunar valves will close. So this will happen during the atrial systole. Now let's have a look on the next phase. After atrial systole, ventricular systole will take place, right? And during ventricular systole, what will happen? Ventricles will contract. Ventricles will contract, and after their contraction, what will happen? That the blood is pushed from the ventricles into the pulmonary artery, and definitely the blood will try to go back into the atria. But what will happen, that how the backward flow of blood into the atria will be prevented? That is by the closure of the atrioventricular valves. So during ventricular contraction, when the ventricles will contract, they'll push the blood to pulmonary artery. If we are talking about the right side, pulmonary artery and aorta. Why aorta? Because aorta is present, and aorta, right? Because the aorta is present on the left side. And during this, which valve will open? The pulmonary valve and aortic valve. Both are called as semilunar valve generally. So pulmonary valve and aortic valve, they both are semilunar valves. Aortic valve will open. And during this, what will happen? That the atrioventricular valves, that is tricuspid and bicuspid, atrioventricular valve will close. Now, the question arises that how these two valves get closed. Now, how the closure of the valves takes place. This closure will take place when, for example, this is the atrium, right atrium, this is the left atrium, and these are the ventricles, and this is the septum that is present between the two ventricles, and this is pulmonary artery, and this is aorta, right? So as you can see here, that the you can say semilunar valve is present here, semilunar valve is present here, and this valve, they are called as tricuspid and bicuspid, or you can say atrioventricular valves. When the atria will squeeze, they will push the blood into the ventricles. And when the blood tries to go back into the atrium, what will happen here? There are flaps, or you can say that there are cup-like structures you can see here, right? And these cups will get filled up with the blood like this. And when they will get filled up with the blood like this, there are tendons and you can say ligaments, sorry, papillary muscles. These are the papillary muscles, and they are attached to the flaps through tendons. Tendons are thread-like structures, and these are the papillary muscles. So during this closure of the atrioventricular valves, what will happen? that the papillary muscles will get contracted. Papillary muscles will contract, and during their contraction or because of their contraction, what will happen? That the tendons will get slackened. Tendons will relax, or you can say they will get slackened. And when they will relax, due to this, what will happen? That the cups are already filled up with the blood, the valve closure will take place. So this is how the atrioventricular valves will close. And because of the pressure of the blood from the ventricles to the aortic valve, this is the aortic valve and this is the pulmonary valve, they are going to open. Why they're going to open? Because the pressure is coming from this side and the valve will get open and the blood will be pushed into the aorta and pulmonary artery by the opening of the semilunar valve. So during ventricular systole, what is happening? That the pulmonary valve and aortic valve, they are going to open. Atrioventricular valves will close by these two steps, right? And ultimately, this is how the ventricular contraction takes place or the systole takes place, right? The next phase is basically the ventricular diastole we are talking about. Ventricular diastole. Diastole means that when the ventricles will be getting filled up with the blood. You know that the atrium and the ventricles, they get filled up with the blood one by one, but definitely when the ventricular contraction is taking place, like here when you can see, the atrial relaxation has started taking place during the ventricular systole. So that's why we can say that atrial diastole is a very short period event. So that's why we cannot discuss it separately, or we don't say that atrial diastole is a separate phase. So when the ventricular systole is taking place, the you can say the atrial diastole has started taking place, right? So when the atrial ventricular systole is taking place, it is pushing the blood into the semilunar valve and it is causing the atrioventricular valve to close. During this period, what will happen? That the blood will start getting filled up into the atrium, atria of its side, right? Because the atrioventricular valves are closed. So during atrial diastole, first of all, it is a very short period event, right? Atrial diastole. Obviously, the atrial relaxation is taking place. And during this relaxation, the atrioventricular valves will close and the semilunar valves are open. So it's a very short period time event because it has started taking place during the ventricular systole. So atrial diastole is a short period event. And ventricular diastole, definitely it's a very important phase, that when the atria are squeezing and the blood is being pushed into the ventricles, right? And the ventricles are getting filled up with the blood. So during ventricular diastole, you can see that the atrioventricular valves, that is tricuspid and bicuspid, atrioventricular valves open during ventricular diastole and semilunar will close. Semilunar will close. Why they will close? Because the blood can go back, or you can say to prevent the backward flow, and semilunar valve will close during the ventricular diastole. So this is the cardiac cycle. Now let's see that how this cardiac cycle is controlled. The control of cardiac cycle. This control is basically done by myogenic muscles. You know that the cardiac muscles are myogenic muscles. Any idea, Ans, what is myogenic muscles? What do we mean by myogenic muscles?
मैम पता नहीं.
Myogenic muscles are the muscles that can contract and relax on their own. What do we mean by that? Basically, जब हम
मैम मुझे
heart
थ्रोट
को
के अंदर मसल्स होते हैं.
they are antagonistic. थ्रोट के अंदर ये मसल्स, स्मूथ मसल्स या आप कह लो कि इसोफेगस के जो मसल्स होते हैं, दे आर एंटागोनिस्टिक, दे आर इनवॉलेंटरी, बट म्यूजेनिक मीन्स दैट दीज मसल्स डू नॉट नीड any involvement of brain, or you can say any involvement of the nervous coordination or the nerves coming from the brain. They can contract and relax on their own, and they can generate wave of excitation by themselves. Are you getting me? What do we mean by myogenic muscles? Myogenic muscles are the muscles that can generate a wave of excitation on their own, right? खुद से अपनी wave of excitation generate कर सकते हैं, number one. Number two, they do not need any involvement of nerves coming from the brain. Do not need nervous coordination from the brain. Nervous coordination from the brain. From brain. It does not mean that the brain is not involved. Brain भेजता है electrical impulses जब, लेकिन emergency condition होती है, जब heart beat तेज होनी होती है, कम होनी होती है. But actually myogenic muscles can be controlled by themselves, or we can say that the myogenic muscles can contract and relax by themselves. ठीक है, खुद से wave of excitation को generate करते हैं, और दोनों एट्रिया पहले contract करते हैं और ventricles की contraction भी यही कराते हैं. But how, ma'am? ये digest नहीं होती बात के what do we mean by the myogenic muscles and how come that they can generate a wave of excitation by themselves? Basically, the heart has got a special patch of muscles present in the right atrium, right? For example, if this is the structure of heart, on the right side in the right atrium, there is a patch of muscles, and that patch of muscles is called as SAN. SAN stands for sinoatrial node. Sinoatrial node is basically a patch of muscles that generate the electrical impulse, or you can say that generate the wave of excitation. इसको ज्यादा wave of excitation हमें बोलना चाहिए, वो इस वजह से क्योंकि ये excitation की जो wave होती है, ये myogenic muscles ही control कर सकते हैं, right? And they just allow the wave of excitation to sweep from the right side to the left side. As you can see, this is aorta, right? And these are the atrium, and these are the pulmonary veins. This is vena cava, from where the blood is coming. Blood is coming, blood is coming. And then these are the atrioventricular valves. They're attached to the papillary muscles and the tendons. Right now, you understand all these things that because I have just described you all the events that are controlling the cardiac cycle, right? So these are papillary muscles. Here there are papillary muscles and the tendons, right? Now what will happen first? That this SAN or sinoatrial node generates a wave of excitation from the right side to move to the left side, right? This, why not downwards? Because there are no conducting fibers present in the heart muscles on the lower side of the heart, right? Or you can say ventricles की जो upper walls होती हैं, dorsal walls होती हैं, ventral walls, sorry, उन ventral walls में wave of excitation को generate करने के लिए या उनको conduct करने के लिए there are no conducting fibers present. और conducting fibers की जो direction hai, that is made by Allah Ta'ala, that is from the right side to the left side in this direction. That is from the right atrium to the left atrium, so that the atrial contraction can take place first. So the conducting fibers are present in this direction, and the wave of excitation, this is the wave of excitation, sweeps from the right to left side, right? And this causes the right and left atrium to contract first, or you can say to do atrial systole first. Atrial systole will take place. Now you understand that what do we mean by atrial systole? That is the contraction. And then after 0.1 second difference, the ventricular systole will happen. But how? Ventricular systole will happen. As I said, that there are no conducting fibers present here on the outer walls. So how come the ventricle contraction will take place? This will take place with the help of another patch of muscle that is present in the median septum. And this patch of muscle is also myogenic. Myogenic means that it can generate its wave of excitation. And this is called as AVN. AVN stands for atrioventricular ventricular node. Right? Now, after the right and left atrium contraction, the wave of excitation will move from the left atrium to the AVN node. What do we mean by AVN node? Atrioventricular node. And this wave of excitation, when sweep down to the median septum, this is because of the conducting fibers, right? This all wave of excitation is moving because of the conducting fibers, right? Or conducting tissues that are conducting the wave of excitation from the right to left first, and then to the AVN. And then from this AVN, the conducting fibers take it down the median septum like this. Can you see that? Okay, or should I change my color so that I can show you that these AVN, right? The conducting fibers will sweep down the median septum in this direction and then to the peripheral walls in this direction, right? That is right and left from the lower side, not from the upper side, so that the ventricular contraction can take place from the lower side and the ventricular systole will take place then. So after 0.1 second difference, the wave of excitation from the left side moves to the AVN, and then AVN conducts the wave of excitation down the median septum through special conducting tissues, and these conducting tissues are called as Purkinje tissues. Purkinje tissues. And these Purkinje tissues are present in the median septum and the ventricular walls on the peripheral sides. Are you all getting me? Ans, what do we mean by sinoatrial node and what is the role of sinoatrial node? Can you tell me, please? Ans, can I hear it from you? Ans, are you here?
यस मैम सॉरी वो माइक का मसला था.
Okay, so what do we mean by SAN and how the SAN is involved in the atrial contraction and why the atrial contraction happens first?
मैम ये आप बस एक बार दफा एक्सप्लेन करा सकती है.
Okay, Adil, any idea, any clue?
No, ma'am.
Okay, now Alize, any idea? That what do we mean? What is sinoatrial node and how sinoatrial node is involved in causing the atrial systole?
No, ma'am.
Why not, bete?
मैम
Where
मुझे
were
पता है
you
वैसे.
all? Okay, sinoatrial node is the patch of
Sino-
muscles present in the right atrium and they are myogenic. Myogenic means that they can start a wave of excitation by themselves. So what they're doing, they're just exciting or they're stimulating a wave of excitation from the right atrium towards the left atrium. Are you getting me, Ans, now?
यस मैम.
And then this wave of excitation that is moving from the right atrium to the left atrium will cause the atrial systole to happen first, right? Means the atria will contract and they'll push the blood downwards. And when they will push the blood downwards into the ventricles, definitely the atrioventricular valves will get open. Now I'm just linking the cardiac cycle with the control, right? That when the atrial systole will happen, the atrioventricular valves will open and the blood will be pushed into the ventricles. This is the part of the cardiac control, cardiac cycle, not cardiac control. Cardiac control means that how the wave of excitations control the atrial systole and the ventricular systole, right? So when the SAN node conducts the wave of excitation from the right to left side, it causes the atrial contraction to happen first, right? And then after 0.1 second difference, what will happen that the wave excitation move to the median septum where there is another patch of muscles present, and that patch of muscle is called as AVN. AVN stands for atrioventricular node, and this is present in the median septum. And then the wave excitation from this AVN will sweep down the median septum, and then to the from the lower side it will sweep up to the ventricular walls, right? Where the conducting fibers are present, where the conducting tissues are present. And those conducting tissues that are present in the median septum and the peripheral walls of the ventricles, they are called as Purkinje tissues. So what happens next? That is AVN will send the wave of excitation through Purkinje tissues in the median, down the median septum. Median septum means the wall that is present between the two ventricles, that is separating the ventricles, and that is not allowing the mixing of the blood. So the AVN, atrioventricular node, will cause the wave of excitation to sweep down the ventricles in the median septum and then to the peripheral walls. And this will cause the ventricular systole to happen. And this ventricular, during this ventricular systole, if we talk about the cardiac cycle, the atrioventricular valves will close and the semilunar valves that are present between the aorta and the pulmonary artery, they are going to open and they are going to send the blood to the pulmonary artery and aorta. Is that clear? Now let's have a look on the book part as well so that you understand it once more. Once more, let's discuss it so that you get the idea clearly. That is how the cardiac cycle is controlled, right? And this is done by the nodes, AVN node and SCN node, right? Let's have a look here. So this is the cardiac control. And this is sinoatrial node, as you can see here, right? This is the sinoatrial node, and that is causing the wave of excitation to start from the right side and it will sweep to the left side. And then it causes the right and left atrium to contract first. They'll push the blood into the ventricles, and then the wave of excitation with 0.1 second difference will move into the median septum where the AVN is present. And then it sweeps down the median septum and then to the peripheral walls, causing the ventricular contraction to happen. And this delay, 0.1 second delay, is very important so that the atria can contract first and the ventricle contracts next, right? So the second wave of excitation will start from the AVN and then it will move down into the ventricles. And this means that the ventricles receive the signals for the contraction, and after that, after the atria will contract, right? And this difference is very important. 0.1 second difference is very important to control the cardiac cycle so that the atria can contract first and the ventricles contract next. And these conducting fibers that are present in this direction, or they are just taking the wave excitation wave to move down into the median septum of the heart, and then along the Purkinje tissues they will move up into the ventricular walls, right, and causing the ventricles to contract. So this is how the cardiac control is being done by SAN and AVN. Number one, number two, and the third thing that is controlling it is the conducting fibers and then the Purkinje tissues, right? So this helps in controlling the cardiac cycle, that when the heart should contract and when the heart should relax. Is that clear, Ans and Adil and Alize now? I hope that's clear. If it's not clear, just let me know.
Ma'am, it's clear.
Very nice. So when the cardiac cycle is taking place, have a look on this graph. This graph is showing you the pressure changes. This red line is for ventricles. As you can see here, they have mentioned it here because this is the left side ventricular and atrial contraction that they have shown you. This black line is for the atrial pressure, and this blue line is for the aortic pressure, right? Now let's have a look. Now here what is happening that when the ventricles will start contracting, the ventricular pressure will build. And ultimately the pressure will build to an extent that at this point, the aortic valve will open. Which valve will open? Aortic valve. Because you know that when the ventricles will contract, obviously the aortic valve present on the left side and the pulmonary valve that is present on the right side, they are going to open. If I make the valves again, this is the pulmonary artery and this is the aorta, right? And sorry, right? Let me make it again. This is the ventricular wall and this is aorta, right? This is aorta. And here there is an aortic valve, and here there is there's right atrium and the left atrium. This is the left one and this is the right one, right? This is the right one. Okay, and the blood vein will be pushed into the from the atrium to the ventricles, and when the ventricles will contract, the pulmonary valve and the aortic valve will open. Obviously, when the ventricular contraction is taking place, right? And when the ventricular contraction is taking place, as I just told you that this red line is showing you the peak, and the maximum pressure is always in the ventricles and aorta, right? Because ventricles exert create the pressure, and aorta basically resist the pressure. So this at this point, the aortic valve will open, and at this point the aortic valve will close. Why? Because यहाँ पर आपको aorta में pressure high होता नजर आ रहा है. It means that the blood has started coming into the aorta. It means that the ventricular, the semilunar valve that is present between the left ventricle and the aorta, that is, you can say, is open, right? And here it will close. Aortic valve will open here and it will close here because the pressure is decreasing in the aorta. It means there is no more blood is coming into the aorta. And here the AV valve will close. Why? Because the ventricular contraction has taken place, and because of that, the atrioventricular valve will close. And as we are talking about the left side, so it would be the bicuspid valve, right? If we will talk about both the sides, so that will be AV valve, right? And at this point, the AV valve will start opening, right? Because the ventricular relaxation is there.